Hello and welcome to a closer look of the weapons used by and within the world of Gears. Taking place on Sera with Earth removed, as we've gone over in a previous lore episode, Gears of War has its own unique set of weapons and tools of war utilized by the COG, the UIR, and even the Locust. Today we'll go over their form and function, at least for the more basic ballistic weapons. Specialty guns and explosive launchers like the Boomshot, Torquebow, and the Scorcher will come in a sequel to this video. We will, however, give an honorable mention and omit the more regular guns from that list. There's examples of rocket launchers, rifles, and more in the comics and books, but vary so little from real-life counterparts or feature so little detail that they can't really get a proper mention. Do these weapons work? Why and how do they work? How have they changed since being introduced to us, the player, and what is their place within the world of Sera to a broader extent? This is what we're going to be covering today. I'm no expert on guns, so if there's anything I miss or got wrong as to the specific mechanics of any weapon, please let me know in the comments below. It's much appreciated. Starting simple with the one class of weapons in their own category, we have the pistols. Only 4 in number, but effective in their own implementation. First, we have the MX-8 Snub pistol, a reliable sidearm and standard issue among the coalition of ordered governments. Introduced sometime during the Pendulum Wars and remaining as the COG standard through and even after the Locust War. Featuring a magazine on the front of the weapon rather than the grip like most pistols you'd see. According to the lore, the Snub is made like this in order to hold more ammunition. It uses a larger cartridge that couldn't just fit into the grip. The Snub fires what the COG calls Cal 50, which can be assumed to be a 50 caliber cartridge, but most of the time the Snub, while powerful in specific conditions, doesn't feel like a 50 caliber pistol, especially when compared to real life deagles. But again, Gears are made of muscle powder and dumbbells, so them tanking 50 Action Express could also be a possibility here. It's a shame that the sound design doesn't follow this choice though. After the Snub, we find the Locust Classic, the Bolok Revolver. A favorite of Grenadiers and even some Gears who looted off of dead grubs, the Bolok is a 6-shot revolver featuring double action on an internal hammer, regardless of this fanning execution in Gears 5.
Get up from that, asshole!
But speaking about sound, this is a gun that packs a punch. Heavy slams of the hammer where what can only be something akin to 600 nitro with how more powerful this revolver is than the Snub's supposed 50 cal rounds. Used by Rom himself, bolters, and even the Theron Guard, on top of being the iconic instrument of execution on General Karn in the hands of Colonel Loomis at the Battle of Halvo Bay. The Bolok is a Gears classic, and when you think power in a single hand, this is where you'll find it. Introduced in Gears of War 2 and a staple of the Cantus Priests, the Gorgon is a dual magazine submachine pistol, firing on a hydraulic system that fed the weapon in bursts between the 2 magazines located on either side of the barrel. Curved just to make reloading easier. I mean, they'd have to when the best you have is the hands of a Cantus. They're not really ergonomic. Loved by the elite of the Locust like Cantus, the armored Cantus, and the various Theron guards, the Gorgon became a great weapon for close quarter combat or even just firing from the hip to spit plenty of lead at your target in as short as a time as possible. Somehow, some way, like with the Hammerburst, the Gorgon's famous burst was removed in Gears of War 3 in exchange for a simple, fully automatic spit, probably to increase its fire rate and even it out more with the arguably faster Snub pistol in Gears of War 2. The newest addition to the pistol lineup and developed by Mbar to be a successor to the Snub, we have the Talon auto pistol. Designed after the former Locust Gorgon, the Talon is made with a fast rate of fire and close quarter combat in mind, Spray and pray from a sickle-shaped magazine, featuring a surprising amount of ammunition from such a small gun, turns a Locust classic into a new age companion against the Swarm. While good at close range, its almost uncontrollable recoil caused by the fire rate reduces the gun's accuracy, thus making it less reliable if your target isn't 5 feet away from you. A personal favorite of mine, Gears also features a hefty list of snipers, used and created by the COG, the UIR, and Locust alike, weapons that are designed to be used at medium to long ranges, starting with the fan-favorite classic with a satisfying pop, the Longshot, a bolt-action, long-barreled sniper rifle that just takes the concept of a sleek barrel and shoves it with a blocky frame and what's described as one of the most competent scopes on Sarah. Designed during the Pendulum Wars to counter the UIR's deadly Marx, the Longshot is known to give Gears the metaphorical ability to reach out and touch someone with just how accurate the scope is. A grand sound that remains mostly unchanged in 16 years of games. A powerful headshot that rings through skulls like a perfectly placed gas tanker. Okay, never mind. We'll let him rest. Apart from a few gimmicks like swapping shoulders and the gun mirroring that, or how the fail to reload means that Gears just had to push on the bolt harder, which doesn't really make any sense, the Longshot is a classic for a reason, and I'd argue that no other sniper in Gears has yet to take its place. On the indie side of things, we have the Marx GZ-18, the first and technically oldest form of the Marx, introduced in Judgment. This was the rifle that influenced the creation of the Longshot. While not as powerful, the Marx features a magazine for more rounds and a faster fire rate, also using a weaker, more simplified scope that's less accurate than the COG counterpart. Used by the UIR almost as commonly as the Lancer was for the COG, the Marx was known among the Indies to be the soldier's best friend, and served greatly until the fall of Goraznia, where the Locust Horde rechambered old Marx rifles and turned them into breech shots. The breech shot, of course, featuring a now larger round, dealing greater damage, but a larger bullet means slightly less space for bullets, taking away a bit of room for extra shots within the magazine. And in classic Locust fashion, the scope was stripped and swapped for a bladed front end. This kept the gun's weight relatively the same, while helping the brutal Locust do their Locust things. There are two prototype forms of the Marto we see in later games. The Mark I serving as the Retro Lancer's Pendulum War equivalent among the UIR, and the Mark II that never made it onto front lines, but did have a longer barrel, larger bullet, and heavier hit to it, not unlike the breech shot, but with a little less blade and a bit more sophisticated design. The last marksman rifle of note, the Mbar, suffers from a lot of the issues all the DB range of weapons do. It just doesn't make any sense for anyone with hands and eyes to use. While it is incredibly powerful and not technically a sniper rifle, being a railgun, specifically an electromagnetic break-action railgun, that's where the name comes from, the gun is useless for efficient combat when not in the hands of a robot. To be fair, it was designed with DB users in mind, but Gears commonly use this weapon. It's produced as if meant to be used by DBs and Gears alike, but features no scope or sights whatsoever. Whenever firing this squared-off rectangle of magnetic death, you're basically just guesstimating where a shot that can kill something might go. This is so far to the point that swarm snipers embed cameras into their eyes so that they can operate the Mbar to get a better standard. But anyone without a heads-up display, which is just about everyone, cannot use this weapon effectively. If there was at least an iron sight or a flip-up sight like on the Lancer, this wouldn't be an issue, but it's a glaring one. And if it's designed for use by robots, why make it usable by the swarm or regular people at all? It's not meant for regular Gears to use, but the fact that they can anyways is the same thing that enables the swarm to steal and to use this hyper-deadly railgun against the COG. Personally, I don't mind the bulky square designs, but what the fuck? And of course the other two DB weapons don't do that much better. Featuring a P90 inspired magazine, the Enforcer SMG is just the same with no sights whatsoever. This is not so much an issue being less accurate than the Mbar and more of a short burst, close range disabler than a far target ranged weapon. The Enforcer is still mighty underpowered compared to the Lancer, which fires at longer ranges. The only advantage to the Enforcer is that its small and conceivably cheap construction and the electromagnetic cartridges that allow for shock rounds make it better when used in non-lethal engagements. Wish somebody told JD about that one though. Used by the bulkier DR1 DBs, the last of the gun blocks is the Overkill. Now let's be honest, this thing doesn't need sights. A widespread shotgun that's meant to be fired in succession of each pull on the trigger. Accuracy isn't your priority when aiming this thing, and the general direction of your target makes it go away. Outside of the fact that it's got massive barrels that don't really serve a purpose outside of being flashy, another break-action science fiction cube is interesting for Gears, but not the most inventive gun in the series. Personally, I still have a love for the Nasher, and while we're speaking in pellets, let's go right to it. A classic 12-gauge lever-action gun that is basically our lovely Terminator 2 1887 model shotgun in a more science fiction frame. The little hump over the top and the notch under the barrel, everything from the golf swing to the pop shots. The Nasher is Gears, no doubt about it. Perfect in close quarters and an essential part of the COG's daily diet since the Pendulum Wars, there's no question why the Locust, Stranded, and even the Swarm would go on to adopt this wonderful use of anti-personnel equipment. Perfected in almost every way, the only major change the Nasher has ever seen was the addition of a shell holder strapped to the side, just to make it that much easier when you need to reload in a hurry. That is, if you're not just running around and hitting people with a good old two-piece.
It's the goddamn car.
Yeah, can we come in?
Shit, why you bringing them up here? Target practice for the G.
2 pieces. Well, that's perfect for our next homely entry on the list, a favorite of the Stranded for the sheer firepower in the single pull of a trigger. Gears of War's sawed-off shotgun actually looks a lot like the fantastical super shotgun from Doom Eternal, with a bulky frame and 2 wide barrels, able to cleave targets into multiple pieces if they just barely got close enough. A slow-ass reload, but devastating power. Taken into action by the Stranded and new players alike, the sawed-off is loved for its simplicity. Easy to use, easy to repair, and perfectly viable as long as the long reload doesn't get in your way. During the siege of Alima, an elite Theron who shadowed General Rom used a retrofitted sawed-off which featured massive bayonets on either side of the barrels, allowing him to bayonet charge and get right close and personal with those on the unfortunate opposite side of this weapon. The regular arms of the Locust, the Hammerburst. Calling this yet another classic feels repetitive at this point, but it is a classic though. The original Hammerburst, of course, looking like the Boogie 2988 of AK-47s and featuring, as it may imply, a hammering array of bursts that often outperform the Lancer Mark II on account of the burst fire leading to less recoil. Even so much so that some Gears like Damon Baird would come to prefer the Hammerburst over the COG-issued Lancer. Later on in the Locust Wars, the Hammerburst and what's known as the Hammerburst II both began to show up around the same time, with the Hammerburst II slowly taking over the former in popularity. Featuring a protruding barrel and proper iron sights, the second degree was more accurate and switched into a higher power semi-automatic from the pure burst fire of the original. A grandstand of the Locust Horde and a favorite of the swarm drones of the new era, the Hammerburst has and always will serve as the Locust antithesis to the Lancer assault rifle. Speaking of, let's finally talk about that face of the series. The gun with the most dramatic changes throughout the history of Gears, the Lancer assault rifle. First appearing in the Pendulum Wars some 20 years before E-Day at the earliest. The Lancer Mark I, or the Retro Lancer, was a low-capacity, high-damage assault rifle with pure accuracy, but a killer spread. Featuring a massive bayonet on the front end, this served as the COG's main issue rifle up until the end of the first year of the Locust Wars, eventually replaced by a smaller caliber but better firing Lancer Mark II, recoil from the former mitigated by a heavier weight as the bladed bayonet was switched out for a chainsaw instead, in order to be effective at cutting through the hides of the Locust Horde. A larger box magazine which fed in a reverse Y shape so that bullets within sat on either side of the chainsaw that operated semi-internally through the gun. This is the stockless assault rifle that would carry the COG to victory and remain its standard in death dealing for the next 5 decades. Only ever slightly changed, the Lancer hardly evolved. Marcus's custom variants featured a wooden stock and a more streamlined design with an angled magazine, opposed to the straight-edged versions used by the COG. And later on, Damon Baird would design the Lancer Mark III, shooting faster and more accurately with an integrated stock and sight rather than a flip-up. And although used profusely throughout the games, the chainsaw bayonet was meant to be a last-ditch emergency type attachment, as most gears attempting to use the bladed end would end up cutting their own fingers off in the process rather than actually cutting a Locust in two. The biggest stray away from the Lancer is the grenade launcher variant, which is just inaccurate in its naming. Although mounted under the barrel in exchange for the chainsaw, the GL does not fire grenades, but more rocket-propelled missiles, not unlike the Javelin launcher. First shooting up into the air to get above targets, then coming down in glorious hellfire. Also featuring a more streamlined rate of fire, probably due to the fact that the magazine doesn't have to be fed in that reverse Y shape anymore. The GL is great and wonderful at what it sets out to do, but it isn't actually a grenade launcher like the name would imply. The last of the more traditional weapons that we have for today is the Claw, an amalgamation of parts and rusted metal that the Swarm have fashioned in order to combat the new COG weapons. A piece put together with literal rebar, the Claw represents the savage primality of the Swarm. A weapon that had been hastily thrown together with scraps taking inspiration from the real-world Lewis gun, a spinning drum magazine at the top feeding into the gun. Although unlike any real-life counterpart, the Claw's bullets are stacked vertically, meaning no matter how primitive the Swarm are supposed to be, this has to be one of the most complicated weapons in order to feed correctly. Most of these weapons either don't make sense or probably wouldn't work in the real world in the context of a rightfully practical encounter, nor are they the most efficient. The Lancer operating as the most glaring example on its front, but they are still cool. Even with the DB weapons, which are incredibly useless in a regular person's hands, I don't mind the squared aesthetic. Makes sense for a hyper-modular robotic system, but not really for a gun. Most often, these complex and expensive systems have to really be effective in order to make up for the downsides. And as a comparison, the plastic toy mock-up of the Lancer is 20 pounds. This is me holding it. If you know anything about lugging around a real gun or even just a regular set of power tools, when you convert this to metal and add the gas into it in order to run the chainsaw, low recoil makes sense, but it would also be incredibly strenuous to lug around on top of all the massive armor plating that gears wear. I guess it's a good thing that they're made of straight muscle mass in order to make up for this. And to anyone still here, thank you for watching. This is indeed the end of the video. Don't worry, there is more coming. I have everything planned out. We're going to go over the power weapons like the Scorcher, Boom Shot, Torque Bow, that kind of shit, and then another third video later on in the pipeline going over heavy weapons and kind of specialty stuff like the Hammer of Dawn, the Mulcher, and of course the Tri-Shot. Everything like that and more to come. Be excited, but for now, remember to stay cool, have fun, and be awesome. Buster out.